All right, Jen, we are kicking off this interview. For those of you that are just watching this, Jen and I had some technical difficulties, although we're not going live right now. I'm recording this, but just need to like settle down for a minute before we have a very serious conversation. I don't mean to make be laughing on here, but I think we need a little bit of lightheartedness, right? Because the topic that we're going to be sharing today is all about parental alienation, and it is a very heavy topic. And I've dealt with my fair share of this in my divorce back in 2012, and so I'm just very grateful that you're here to share and discuss and give some tools about this, because there's a lot of women in the divorce community that are going through this experience, and not just women, men experience this as well. But for the sake of the community that I coach in, I coach divorced moms. So we're going to just make this very specific to moms. And this is Jen. I'm going to have Jen introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name's Jen Szeghi, and I have been working with families for 20 years now. I started off working with juveniles in juvenile detention centers, as well as child adolescent psychiatric units and in the court systems when I first started my career. And then after that, I started as a child adolescent mental health therapist. And what I was finding is that a lot of times, really, parents just need the education and skills to help their children through the tough times. Stressors are part of life. And if we don't handle the stressors in a healthy way, then they can get all tangled up in our minds and lead to that depression and anxiety and behavioral problems in kids. So I took the approach of, educating the parents to help their children in order to process what they were feeling so that it doesn't stay bunched up and they can make positive behavioral choices. So I did that for about 10 years. And then as much as I loved it, I felt like I wasn't being challenged enough. Those temper tantrums were not challenging enough for me. So I found a need that a lot of kids were going through divorce with their parents, and they have a lot of the grieving process, but again, they're not sure how to handle it. So I started specializing in helping families through divorce. And then I just made my way up the spectrum to working with some of the high conflict families. And that's where the parent alienation comes in. And as I look back through my career, I remember as a mental health therapist, the first time I started working with families in domestic relations court, it does not look the same as other issues. And so as a mental health therapist, I really wanted to explore what are causing these behaviors when children do not want to see the other parent. I do have to be very transparent that I don't think my field of psychology, first, we don't fully understand this yet, number one, but number two, a lot of therapists don't realize that this is going on. And so it can be overlooked. And in fact, the parent who's being abusive may look like the healthy parent. So it's my goal, my mission to bring awareness to parent alienation. The sooner it is caught in the process, the more we can have better intervention for our kids, as well as for the parents who are really trying to be healthy for their kids. Unfortunately, it's usually an abuser, a mental, emotional abuser, manipulator, who is using the target parent and the child as like pawns, and they manipulate enough to the point where they can just sit back and let it play out between the parent and the child. And I'll get into explaining that a little bit later about what I mean, but it is sick that it occurs. So my mission is helping parents, good humans, know the signs and know how to intervene and be supportive for their children so that we can ultimately save our children from this psychological abuse.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that. It is the manipulation and use it, like I say, we use our children, like this happens when you use children as currency, right? Because when the abuser can no longer control their ex partner, right, then they sort of go to the next best thing, which is unfortunately the children, and they're easily manipulated. So before we kind of dive into some tools and all that, let's define this, right? Everybody turns to Google and tries to do their own research. I want to define what parental alienation is, right? And also high conflict
Mhm.
divorce situations. So like, can you give us a little definition about what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so very simply put, parent alienation is any kind of manipulation between a child and a parent's relationship. And that can come in all kinds of forms. So that can come verbally and direct, where the parent is talking to the child negatively about the other parent, saying about a lot of bad things, or even just twisting the truth. So maybe there's some truth to the matter, but they twist it enough to make the target parent look bad. But it can easily be where a parent non-verbally presents that he or she is tense when when the child's talking about the other parent, and the child's picking up of, okay, I can't, something's wrong with the target parent. I can't talk about the target parent because that upsets, this parent. So it can be direct. I think sometimes all of us at some point may have been in that situation where we didn't intend to do it, but it can come across like our children can interpret that as something negative and can interfere. So we need to be self-aware too, to make sure that our children are free to talk about their positive or even negative experiences. We really do want them to come to us in our life and talk about these experiences, even if it was tough for us to get through that part of our life. So just, being supportive.
Let's talk about just real quick nonverbal ways that the alienation can happen, right? Like kids are very good at picking up on energy, right? With mom and dad, and they're watching, right? And it's not even so much what you're saying. Sometimes it's like, let's say the child comes home and wants to share something about dad, and all of a sudden mom shuts down, mom starts, like her energy starts changing or shifting, or she has a look on her face, right? Or gets angry or whatever. And not to say that of course we're emotional human beings, so we have emotion, but do you notice a lot of nonverbal ways that this comes into play as well?
Mhm. Yeah, you just really described it. It's just having those normal human emotions that we have. And if we're not aware that our kids pick up on it, what you were just discussing actually has a name. It's called emotional contagion, in which our emotions are contagious to those around us. And our kids are even more influenced by our emotions than like adults to adults. And positive emotions are contagious as well, so that's great. Unfortunately, the negative emotions are so much more contagious. So if your child's telling you something and it triggers some emotions of anxiety, your child's going to pick up on that anxiety as well. So that's where, yeah, it's okay to have those feelings, but trying to protect our child and maybe, go into another room and have those feelings while your child's playing with something, to just journaling about it, or quick talking to a friend as long as they can't hear you, so that you're able to process that and let it go so it doesn't influence your child. They're so smart, and they can very much pick up of, okay, I can't talk about this with mom, or I can't say this when I'm at dad's. And with the situation that they're in, we really want them and really need them to feel free to talk about whatever goes on at either household.
Right. So being able to be a safe container for your children, because you want them to come and talk to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you differentiate that? Because I know there's a difference between having the child come and talk to you versus you going in trying to find information, right? Or being an investigator and trying to dig out or look for evidence to back up your belief that dad's house, the child doesn't want to be at dad's house, doesn't like dad's house. And if you have this belief, or you start creating this belief, then you're going to constantly look for that evidence, right? To support that.
Yes, it's confirmation bias. So if you have this bias, you're going to look for the confirming facts on it. I would say the important part is making sure that as a healthy parent, you're taking care of yourself and your emotions. And so then you have that self-awareness, and you know that you're not trying to find ways to interfere with that relationship. And when you're healthy, and your kids feel comfortable coming to you, then it's really them coming to you about it. And also knowing that they have their moments, right? Especially, teenagers, there are some normal arguments that happen in that parenting dynamic, and not for us to look at, okay, just because they're complaining about the other parent doesn't mean that I need to go and do anything to interfere with it. It's just the child's venting about it, and child will get over it and continue a relationship, because there's many positives about the relationship as well.
So you worked a lot with the court system, and I know it's very frustrating for a lot of parents. And myself was in the hands of the court system, and I saw the dynamic in my personal experience. I can't speak for everybody, but in my experience, the court system is just trying to look at the child and the situation, that what's going on, but they're not looking at the bigger picture, which is the unhealed wounds of the parents, right? I mean, I don't even know if they have the capacity to go down that road through the courts, or even force anything or mandate anything, because really, like you said, if the child is being used as a pawn or as currency, it's really not about the child. So how are they looking at the dynamic of the parents in this situation and what's going on at a deeper level?
Yeah, and I really think it depends upon the lawyers that are involved in the case and know what to ask for. Um, I think the courts mean well. I think they're very overwhelmed with everything, and there is no possible way, with the amount of time a judge has to hear a case, can know every important aspect that's going on with the family. So I think what's important to talk to our group about is knowing that part of the games that the alienator plays is, you're taking a very healthy human, maybe some grieving process through the divorce process, but as the manipulator, the alienator starts to play these games, it starts to take the mental health away from the good human parents,
Right.
to where they're coming across as they're very angry. They're anxious, they're afraid of what's going to happen, and they're just having this normal human reaction to all this chaos that is going on in their life. And so then they're taking this to court, and they want the court to understand. But what happens is that manipulator has just played some games. Target parent is showing up angry, anxious, and afraid, whereas the alienating parent is showing up very calm,
Right.
very
It's very
convincing.
frustrating. Yeah.
This is where the mental health professionals get it wrong too, because that person looks like they're mentally healthy.
Right.
So
Right.
really, they are the ones that are psychologically abusing the target parent and the child. And so it's very important, when parents are going through this, that they are taking care of themselves. They're getting the therapy to help dealing with this, because it is an emotional roller coaster to be on that. I mean, they're toying with something that's so primitive. As moms,
Right.
that's innate. We want to protect our child. And when
Right.
they're threatening and taking away our child, that triggers the deepest part of our fight or flight response. So it is, again, it's a very normal reaction, but it's like the alienators are taking that and toying and playing with it. And we're having the natural human response, and then it works against us.
Right. And I get that. All of a sudden, that targeted parent feels like they're on trial, right? Like they have to now be in the driver's seat of having to defend and prove themselves. And that could be emotionally and mentally and physically exhausting. So now you're in a place of, like you said, I think most divorced moms' biggest fear is losing their children. And so now this is starting to feed into that fear, and you're in this place where you just don't feel safe anymore. The courts don't really they're not looking to protect mom. So if you're in this situation, Jen has tools that we're going to talk about today, right? The goal of this is to empower women, because you are not powerless, right? Like you're saying, once you do the work to be in a good energetic place of healing yourself and practicing self-care and making sure you're doing those necessary things, there's also tools that moms can have, right? So they can feel empowered. So when things like this happen, like what can they do? What can these moms do that are in this place right now of having to constantly defend and fight? Because that energy if you stay stuck in that, that's not going away, right? You're going to be doing this till who knows how long. So, and I believe how you do anything is how you do everything. So what are some tools that they can start practicing right now that start shifting the dynamic for themselves and the relationship between them and their child?
One thing I have is stop playing defense and start playing offense. Like you said, it's like you constantly feel like you're defending yourself. And as a good human response, when somebody accuses us of something, we're just like, okay, no, that's not what happened. Here's what happened. And we continue to put energy. And if we defend ourselves and that problem goes away, it doesn't matter to the alienator, because the alienator is just going to keep throwing things. And the faster you try to resolve it, the faster it's going to come at you. And all that really matters is for you to define whose opinion really, truly matters of you. Your children, number one, opinion matters. And yeah, of course, if it's in court, the judge's opinion matters. You don't have to defend yourself to the alienator. No matter what you say, it's going to waste your time and your energy. So instead, we're going to stop playing defense. We're going to start playing offense. And how you play offense, again, you take care of yourself mentally and be mentally healthy for your kids, but you start making sure your connection with your children goes deep. And that is a constant nurturing process. And with some of the clients that I work with, it is having those special bonding moments and having that connection, speaking the child's love language, and then they go to the other parent's house and that bond starts to be unraveled. And so then the child comes back and the child's upset and kind of disrespectful towards the parent. And I have the parent go through this process of, okay, talk to them. Well, there's something going on. Help them lower those emotional walls by having those emotional outlets. And it's amazing. I love hearing the process that my clients go through and how the kid comes home and, you know, is really disrespectful, rude, mean. And some of these kids, it's not characteristic of them at all to be doing that. And they just do that towards the target parent. And then as they unravel those emotions, then the parent can get in there and reconnect. And that's a tough situation to be in. But the alternative of losing that bond, because each time the child goes to the other parent's house, it continues to be severed, that's not a way to live. And plus, on top of that, the great experiences my clients talk about, because they have to actually focus and make sure they are keeping that bond there.
Right.
When the kids look back on their childhood, those are the moments they're going to remember. So it's kind of like, you know, in this situation, you have to know what you're dealing with, and you have to be very strategic in how you connect with your child and how you step at. Sometimes I think of this as like dodgeball, and like the target or the alienator is throwing just all these balls, and it's just like, just step away. You don't have to catch that accusation. You don't have to respond to that. Don't let them waste your time, you know?
Right.
So really focusing on nothing the alienating parent does.
Right.
I'm putting all that effort in. I'm connecting with my child. I'm strengthening this bond with my child.
Right. So you're constantly not focusing on what's going on here at dad's. You're just refocusing that bond, focusing on the child's. And so let's say child comes home, right, from dad's house. Dad just told me A, B, and C about you, and like none of it was good. Like, what is the conversation? Because this is a question that somebody in the community asked. What does this conversation look like? What does it look like for a smaller child and even maybe like a teenager? And before we answer that question, do you see, is there an age group where this is more prevalent? What is that target?
It's definitely adolescents. So you may see that a parent has the campaign of denigration and they're working on the child, but it doesn't really set in until the teenage years. And the reason that it works during the teenage years is because of the developmental stage that the teenager is going through. They're going through some individuation. So it's very natural for them to start breaking away from parents. That way, when they become adults, you know, there's not a lot of anxiety that's going on. It's a smooth transition to they're responsible. They can live on their own. So it's very natural and normal to have that. And even in intact families, there is a lot of arguments that go on between daughters and mothers, sons and fathers is usually the more heated arguments that happen.
Right.
So that's very, very normal that that happens.
Right.
But the alienator takes and takes advantage of that developmental
Right.
stage to try to work. And unfortunately, in 10 to 15% of divorce cases, they are successful at alienating a child severely.
Yeah, my son left my home at 14, and because of a lot of stuff that was going on during that time. So yes, that teenage years is really impressionable, and I was constantly fighting and defending myself and trying to put out fires all the time. And it, so that like, because of that energy, I started pushing my son further and further away, right? He didn't want to hear about it. And so then I ended up being, you know, the bad guy, because he just didn't want to be around mom. It felt exhausting. And so the minute that I did exactly what you're saying, let go and heal myself, was when, and he didn't completely shut me out. We did have communication, but the minute that I started healing myself and doing the real work, that's when the relationship just flourished. You know, I couldn't see that then because I was so afraid of exactly what happened, of just losing him. And then, you know, and then my daughter was right behind him. I was afraid of losing her too next. So when the child comes home, what should the conversation be? Dad said this, that, and the other. How should this what should the communication look like?
Yeah, I want to get to that, but I do want to
Okay.
respond to what you just said, because I
Okay.
think you just gave a perfect example of what I meant by the alienator starts to manipulate and then can step back and just let the two pawns go back and forth, and they don't have to do anything.
Right.
And so that is, you're right. That is why I point out why it's so important for you to be mentally healthy, because kids who are being alienated are going to have a lot of negativity that comes with them, and that is hard as a parent to take some of that disrespect or without returning in that negative behavior, and it just kind of bounces back and forth off of each other till the child just wants to separate. So you as the adult want to be aware and say, okay, I know they're going to, I know my child's going to come home, they're going to be in a bad mood, maybe they're going to be disrespectful. I will say it's okay to put boundaries and say, you know what, I really want to listen to you right now, but it's really hard to listen to you when you're talking to me like that. Kids really do need boundaries. So, and it is perfectly okay to put those kind of boundaries on them. And that way, when you're aware of it, then you can stay calm and go through the process of asking questions to help them relieve their emotions and then get back to that happy place. But the child has to be able to have their emotions first. So getting back to the question you were talking about, well, what happens if your child comes home and says, Dad said A, B, and C about you? It should always be about the child. You don't want to let the child know your perspective of the situation. And I think it's okay to let your child know what you're feeling, but not specific to this situation. I think our children can learn a lot about feelings, but if they think that you're upset about this, then that's going to shut them down and they're going to feel guilty for bringing it up. So for this, I think you just want to have that very even tone and just have, I like what Dr. Amy Baker says, have what's called compassionate curiosity, to where you just ask them questions of like, oh, well, what do you think about that? Do you think I have a hard time with that? And really emphasize that your child has the right and has the brain power to think for themselves and make their own opinion. I would also focus on the feelings, because again, that goes back to they're tense because they're in this really tight, stressful position. And if we can relieve those feelings and bring down that wall, that's going to help them in so many different ways, but especially, keeping that connection with your child to make sure alienation doesn't occur is really important. So just what do you think about that? Or what do you feel about that? And maybe the third question is there anything else you want to talk about? But nothing to where you have to respond at all. It's all about what their perception is. And I actually had a lot of those conversations with my boys when they came back from their parents. And I do, as I look through this, I think I see that there are parent alienation tactics that were being used against me. But I luckily have the parent coaching background, the mental health background, that I knew how to respond to that situation. And what it ended up doing is it backfired at my co-parent, because my child didn't want to go and hear negative things about me um, by my co-parent. So these tactics really do work, but we need to get the education out there on how to respond to these campaigns of denigration and the manipulation by the parents alienator.
Yeah, I love that. So, it was really for me, like just getting to a place of not being reactive, right? Because my divorce was very high conflict. And so I was in this constant fight or flight, like you said, the survival. I was always on the defense. And yeah, that becomes very exhausting. And who wants to be around somebody who's in that energy all the time? I certainly didn't want to be around myself, really. So I get that, like, because you're so afraid at the possibility of losing your child that we forget that to just keep, nurturing that bond. You can't control what other people say. And it would literally drive you insane if you had to put out every single fire. And so to me, that's sort of wasted energy, where kids are very smart. Like you said, my son is 19 now. So I have a little bit of hindsight where I can see where I went wrong and where I could have done better. And I owned that. If you're in this situation, you have to own your part too. I think it's very important, because sometimes we also feed into that, right? Or we start bad mouthing the other parent because we're trying to defend ourselves. So, and then that energy keeps circulating, right? And then you're in just this constant battle. And so you have to step back, because like I always say, if you want something to die, you have to stop breathing life into it. So
yeah, that's a really
focus on
good
the
point.
child, right? The child is what matters, the relationship with the child, and not what dad's doing over there. I mean, obviously, you can't stop that conversation, but I mean, these were a few of the questions that the women in the community had.
Yeah. Can I follow up with that? Because
Yeah,
I want
absolutely.
to just say 100%. Yeah, it's not right that these alienators are doing it, but it's only making the situation worse for ourselves if we're feeding into that. And I see a lot of people, I belong to some of these groups, and they're ready to take their case to court, and court's gonna, change everything. Well, even when these parents do get full custody, if they can prove parent alienation, which is really tough to
Really
prove,
hard. Yeah.
if the child's a teenager and the bond is severed, they don't care what court papers say.
It doesn't, they can
They
even
just know
decide
that
where
they're
they want to
connected.
live anyways, right? So that doesn't matter. I mean, in California, at my son's age, he could decide where he wanted to live. So it didn't matter if there was parental alienation or not going on. So really, you're putting a lot of energy and focus on what, at the end of the day, is not going to matter. You can show however many texts or emails that you want, conversations that you recorded. For me, that was a lot of wasted energy. And I had to get to a point, because they actually appointed counseling for our case. And so my son and I were in counseling, and literally I felt like there was one point in the counseling session where I was like, wow, I feel like I'm on trial here, and I left a marriage because I didn't want to be in this place. And now I'm allowing my ex to now use my child to still stay stuck in this place. And it was a lesson that I needed to be like, okay, you can't keep doing this to yourself. And so for anyone that's in that situation, you really need to take your power back, and you have
And
to do it.
that's exactly what I wanted to say, because as soon as you step into that and you see how much of the situation that you can control, that is absolutely freeing and empowering. And that's the only way you're going to save the relationship with your child, is when you just start looking at what you can control. Because what's going to happen, it doesn't matter the amount of facts that, I could give you facts on how this could harm children, and you could take the facts to the alienator. They don't see themselves as a problem. They don't care. They're very selfish. And
Right.
so waiting for them to change, less than 10% of people who have the narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, change. So your time and energy is much better invested in just looking at yourself and looking at what you can control the situation, and really looking for those I call them micro opportunities, because sometimes parents don't even feel like they're working, but they're working. It's like planting the seeds, and you just
Right.
have to keep watering, keep nurturing. and your child will come around.
Yeah.
Even the children who are truly alienated, I've read some research from children who are adults now who are alienated, and they don't want their kids, or they don't want their parents to give up on them.
Right.
And I know it's really hard when it's severe alienation and there's not hardly any contact or no contact. It's a lot of energy to put to get nothing back. But as parents, we don't really have an option. We just have to take care of ourselves and keep pushing forward on that.
Right, right. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. So where could everyone find you? Do you have a website?
Yes. So my website is www.successfulparentingllc.com. And I also have a Facebook group that is facebook.com/groups/successful co-parents.
Okay, I'm going to put those links in the notes on this just so people can find you. And I'll put your bio on there. And so that way, if anyone's going through this process, you have Jen here to help you out. She's an expert in this. And if anyone has any questions or wants to know more, just I'll make sure Jennifer gets those. If there's something that we touched on that you really just want to know more about, or they could just go directly to your website, right? And just send you a message from there. I think we froze for a quick second. Are you there, Jen?
That sounds great.
Okay. Sounds good, Jen. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but hopefully you can hear me.
Technical issues.
Yeah. But I'll make sure I have all your information